Tonight on Bridge City News, a movie which is stirring up a lot of controversy has been blocked by Canadian distributors. BCN's Loris Alexander will explain why there's such an uproar over the film. An anti-energy bill which Premier Jason Kenney has been fighting has been struck down by the Canadian Senate. And we hit the streets with the Lethbridge Police Watch program to see the big difference these trained volunteers are making in our community.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Many Canadian movie distributors have decided not to air the film Unplanned. The movie is based on Abby Johnson's memoir, Unplanned, the dramatic true story of a Planned Parenthood director. Producer Lisa Wheeler says they've been blocked from distributing the film at many theaters in Canada. But as Loris Alexander explains, there's a movie theater owner in Lethbridge who is trying his best to bring the film here.
The movie Unplanned has generated a lot of interest. We've had many phone calls, many emails. People want us to see it. I'm sure half the country doesn't want to see it, and according to an article I read the other day, it's apparently banned in Canada. Not sure why exactly. Hollywood puts out controversial films at the best of times, but this one seems to be very polarizing.
Unplanned is based on the memoir of Abby Johnson, a former Planned Parenthood clinic director who has since become an international speaker and pro-life advocate.
One day she was actually taken into the procedure room. She got a look at what she was doing, and she realized that she was not dealing with a bunch of cells. She saw in the ultrasound a perfectly formed baby resisting and fighting from being, not to be graphic, but sucked out of the womb.
Canada's two largest movie chains, Cineplex Odeon and Landmark, have no plans to show the film, citing the film's content.
It appears that Cineplex and Landmark, two of the biggest players in Canada, don't want to touch it. And I guess I can understand why. There's no distributors that are willing to pick up the film and maybe take the flack that comes with it.
Our rating usually stems from nudity, sexuality, foul language, and violence. And Unplanned has no nudity, it has no sexuality, it has no foul language. But the Motion Picture Association did say by seeing the abortion on screen, they deemed it violent, which was an admission in itself.
After its release, Unplanned was the fourth top-grossing movie in the U.S., despite the fact that several TV networks refused to air its trailer, and its Twitter promotional account was temporarily suspended on opening weekend for no clear reason. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
In Alabama and other conservative states, pro-life politicians emboldened by the addition of conservative justices to the U.S. Supreme Court are hoping to ignite legal fights that would eventually overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade decision. That was a decision by the Supreme Court in 1973 protecting a woman's right to an abortion.
I like the way you say that.
Well, the minute the Alabama law goes into effect, or the minute the Georgia law that was just passed goes into effect, there will be lawsuits, and in all likelihood, lower courts will strike them down. They'll have to strike them down because they are clearly inconsistent with the court's precedents in three cases: Ho Women's Health, Casey, and Roe. It's not just Roe anymore. There are three cases that protect a woman's right to have an abortion. All of these laws are inconsistent with all of those cases. I imagine lower court judges will do their job, strike them down, and then the Supreme Court will either take those cases or they won't. A lot of states, including Georgia and probably today Alabama, are enacting abortion bans for the reason of getting this issue back to the Supreme Court, although for decades now, most of the states in the South, like many other states in the country, most of which are red states, have been passing laws restricting abortion, making it more harder for women to get abortions, and all of that, I think, is geared towards getting a case up to the Supreme Court to reconsider Roe v. Wade.
The Ontario Court of Appeal has unanimously agreed with the policies of the College of Physicians and Surgeons on medical assistance in dying and human rights obligations. The court says doctors who object to assisted suicide and abortion must refer a patient to a willing and available physician. Groups including the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada say they were disappointed in the ruling. The court said that even though the policies infringe on some physicians' religious freedoms, it was justifiable since it advances the CPSO's goal of ensuring equitable access to health care. David Goretzky, the acting president of the EPC, says the policies violate the religious freedom of physicians and requires them to act against their religious convictions. Walking 10 hours a day, 4 days a week, That's what dozens of volunteers have been doing since the beginning of May. They are part of the new Watch program with the Lethbridge Police Service. As Jeanette Rocher explains, they're helping to keep the streets of Lethbridge a little bit safer.
240 kilometers. That's how far Jiaxi Liu says he's put on these boots. Step by step, it's getting him closer to his dream.
I want to be a police officer, and I just want to help people.
Liu, who goes by the nickname G, is a Chinese immigrant who moved to Lethbridge from Saskatoon to attend the criminal justice program at Lethbridge College.
I can honestly say that I would never be me right now if I never went to the college.
But this isn't the 24-year-old's only gig.
And I'm in Arches, right, helping people who are in need, who are, struggling every day with drug addiction, struggling every day with homelessness. It opened my mind up and opened my eyes up. They're great people. They're just not in their best shape. They need a little help to get back from the bottom, right? And I believe that they deserve to be helped, and we should help them.
G's experience with Arches has prepared him for what he needs to do daily in the Watch program.
We look for signs of overdose. We look for people who are sleeping on the ground, maybe just check on them and see how their day is going.
I think I prefer walking just because you actually get that personal, connection and communication with the people in Lethbridge, whereas if you're driving, it's not really the same. You don't really stop by and take the time to ask people how their day is.
His teammate Autumn Jerry shares his passion for law enforcement.
My grandfather was a retired RCMP, so I've heard many stories and it always just interested me.
Together, they spend their 10-hour days walking and talking to everyone they see.
That's how we get to know people, right? How are you doing?
Morning.
And keeping a watch out on the downtown area.
Ever since I heard about you guys and heard about the whole cost, I've noticed that things have been a little bit more calm, and even just talking with my coworkers, I think we can all agree that yeah, you guys have a huge impact on the community, and for that we're very grateful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Rocher.
A seminar on tackling sexual harassment in the workplace was held recently at Lethbridge College. With May being the month of sexual violence awareness, the college brought in a speaker from Edmonton to talk about ways of supporting victims of workplace harassment.
Really, we just need to start with a place of believing people who come forward with allegations of sexual harassment. It's the first step. When we act with disbelief, we make people feel unsupported and unwilling to share more about what happened. I think that we all have the ability to address this problem. We're all aware it exists. We just need to work together and maybe work together with some of our community agencies to help tackle this problem.
The new Science and Academic Building at the University of Lethbridge will have a 2-day official grand opening September 13th and 14th. It will feature interactive programs designed to showcase the 38,500 square foot facility, along with celebrating science education, research, and discovery. Officials say once the new building is open, it'll attract new students from across North America. According to the president of the U of L, Mike Mann, it'll also be 53% more sustainable than traditional science buildings. Today, during the regular weekly SAC procession, Speaker Lita Pejderek from the Nature Conservancy of Canada presented a talk on protecting our grasslands.
Grasslands offer a large amount of different values for not just wildlife habitat, but also for forage production for wildlife and livestock. Their water, they capture water, store it, and filter it for us. They protect our soils. And a hot topic, like you mentioned, is carbon sequestration. And actually, surprisingly, grasslands store and trap carbon as good as a forest would. So that's really important in our changing climate and with all the issues that we're faced today.
Grasslands are a working landscape that support a wide range of animals and economies, from large grazers like cattle to many species at risk. Coulees, prehistoric eggs, and a lot of dinosaur bones. That's what you can expect to see in Warner, Alberta this summer. The Devil's Coulee Dinosaur and Heritage Museum has just undergone some renovations and updates, and they have a few new things planned for the public.
So this is Devil's Coulee, which is Canada's first egg nesting site. We've been here for a couple years now, quite a few years actually, but this year we've gone under some renovations that offer some new and different interpretive stuff we got here this year. We got a new gift shop coming in this year known as Charlie's, which is named after our embryonic dinosaur here in the museum. We have a new mural coming into our main gallery, as well as a new excavation quarry, which is taking place in the next room. That quarry will actually have Wendy Sloboda, the discoverer of the site, coming in every Thursday to talk to different tourists in a meet and greet if you want to come out for that.
The museum opens its doors for the season on May the 17th. Each summer in Lethbridge, we have Whoop Up Days, and in Calgary in July, it's the legendary Calgary Stampede. This year, the 10-day festival will have unique culinary offerings, including deep-fried octopus, ice pops made from pickle juice, and even deep-fried chicken skin.
Pushing people's taste buds to try something new, unique, and different, right? Changing the perspective of what Midway food is, and encourage people to come down and have fun. Today we're releasing 50 foods, but we actually have 90 new foods this year. It is actually a very big challenge. We work very hard with our vendors, our independent food vendors, to create new things every year. We scour the internet and we scour all the American fairs and the Canadian fairs to see what new ideas are coming out, but we also build and design some new ideas as well on our own. But it is a lot of fun every year.
Recreational use cannabis became legal in Canada last October. Since that time, police have introduced mandatory field sobriety tests when you roll through a check stop. Many people have a problem with it, saying it's simply unconstitutional. You can include Vancouver criminal lawyer Kyla Lee in that group.
I think the random breath testing provisions of the criminal code need to go. They are unconstitutional. The Supreme Court of Canada has repeatedly ruled since the early 80s that roadside breath testing violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it's only saved by the fact that people are asked to do this on the basis of an officer believing there's alcohol in their body.
Catch the full interview with Ms. Lee talking about the problems with the device, which may give you a false positive during a roadside impairment test. That's coming up after business news. 5 dogs were a huge hit on Parliament Hill as vets lobbied for legal changes that would allow them to prescribe medical cannabis for animals. That's right, you heard that correctly, pot for pets.
So as a veterinarian, many dogs and cats like Max come to our practice all the time looking for some alternatives in some cases from traditional medications that they're using. And as you know, with the Cannabis Act in place, many people are affected in a positive way through some of the therapeutic benefits that they're seeing on the medical side in people. And all mammals have an endocannabinoid system, and through research and through people using the products anecdotally, we know that there are some potential benefits in the same way people benefit from the use of these products for pain, for anxiety. We know for pets that affects them in the same way. So by adding veterinarians to the authorization list, the medical list, it allows us to have open conversations with our pet parents as to where these products could potentially fit therapeutically into the tool chest when we look at treating them for multiple ailments.
The Trudeau Liberals' controversial BC oil tanker ban bill has been struck down by the Senate. A vote against Bill C-48 by independent Senator Paula Simons, along with 5 Conservative senators, swayed a final decision in favor of the Senate nixing the bill. The move does not immediately kill the oil tanker moratorium, but it will stop the legislation in its tracks. A vote on the report is expected in the coming days. A decision to kill the bill would provide major relief for the Alberta government, along with many in the energy sector and First Nations communities who oppose the legislation. Opponents to Bill C-48 said it unfairly discriminated against oil pipelines that aim to ship oil from ports along the northern BC coast. The 2 Canadians who have been detained in China for several months have now formally been arrested. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he's working with allies to try and help both Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor.
We continue to take the safety of the Canadians arbitrarily detained in China with the utmost priority. We will continue to work with our allies and work directly with China to ensure that they understand that we are a country of the rule of law and that we will allow our legal processes to unfold independently, while at the same time we will always stand up for Canadians and continue to. But we will also make it very clear that we're not going to change our values or our systems, including the independence of our justice system, because China disagrees with our approach.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern today at the Canadian residence in Paris. The two spoke about New Zealand's plan for dealing with hate and extremism online in the wake of the Christchurch mosque attacks on March the 19th.
Your leadership following Christchurch resonated around the world, and the extra step that you've taken because of what happened on the social media platforms and the leadership that you've had on countering terrorism and the internet has been really significant. And I really want to thank you for that.
It is wonderful to be able to use this opportunity to catch up on other issues as well. And can I express on behalf of New Zealand our gratitude for the solidarity, the condolences you offered in the immediate aftermath of the 15th of March. But it's one thing to offer that, and it's another to take the time and the effort to travel and show that support for the initiatives that we undertook yesterday.
Responders in Ketchikan, Alaska recovered the wreckage of the larger of the two planes that collided this week. It was lifted onto a barge. Officials say recovering the smaller plane will take a little bit longer.
It's the part of the job that you don't look forward to.
We were out there yesterday. There was about 20 boats. Good Samaritans go out to help.
37-year-old Elsa Wilk from Richmond, BC was one of the 6 people who died in the crash on Monday. It was on this day that the first Oscars were presented. Actor Henry Fonda was born, and Muppets creator Jim Henson died. This is Today in History for May the 16th.
May 16th, 1868. In Washington, the U.S. Senate fails by 1 vote to convict President Andrew Johnson on the first article of impeachment against him. Johnson is eventually acquitted on all charges, prompted by his clashes with the post-Civil War Congress, and serves out the rest of his time in office. 1929. And the winner is the first Academy Awards. The Oscars are presented during a banquet at Hollywood's Roosevelt Hotel. The movie Wings wins for Best Production. Emil Jannings wins for Best Actor. Janet Gaynor wins for Best Actress. 1905.
Wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there.
Actor Henry Fonda is born in Grand Island, Nebraska. Among his movie roles, The Grapes of Wrath, 12 Angry Men, and On Golden Pond. And 1990.
The candy man can, 'cause he mixes it with love and makes the world taste good. Makes the world taste good.
Sammy Davis Jr., singer, dancer, actor, and member of the Las Vegas Rat Pack, dies of cancer in Los Angeles at age 64. Also that same year,
someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and me.
In New York, Jim Henson, creator of the Muppets from Kermit the Frog to Sesame Street, dies of pneumonia at age 54. Today in History, May 16th. Mike Gracia, The Associated Press.
We had kind of a mixed bag today. Some clouds, sunshine, even some rain. But if you like the moisture, good news. A few more showers are in the forecast. Complete weather details are coming up. We had light showers off and on today. Tonight, more rain developing with a low near 4 degrees. Tomorrow, showers and a high of only 7. More rain and 7 again for Saturday. Sunday, the rain should dissipate, but we should still see some clouds and a high of 9. Victoria Day holiday Monday, the mercury will climb to 13 under a partly cloudy sky. Even warmer on Tuesday with a high of 16 expected. Wednesday, a chance of showers and a high near 16 once again. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 18 and an average low of 4. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1988 at 32 degrees, and the record low was -4 in 1992. Sunrise was at 5:46, sunset at 9:10. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. A good chance of showers and 16 for Victoria, rain and 18 degrees for Vancouver. Showers and 7 for Calgary tomorrow. A mixture of sun and cloud and 16 for Edmonton. Mainly sunny and 14 for Regina. Sunshine and 15 is expected for Saskatoon on Friday. Sunny and 15 as well for Winnipeg. A good chance of rain and 18 tomorrow in Toronto. Showers and 17 for Ottawa. Drizzle or rain and 15 for Montreal. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have light showers and 15. Halifax, Nova Scotia will be mainly cloudy and 15. Charlottetown, PEI will have a mixture of sun and cloud and 11. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect lots of clouds and a high of 13 degrees on Friday. Air Canada is in exclusive talks to purchase Air Transat. The deal would be worth $520 million. Canada's largest air carrier is proposing to acquire Montreal-based Transat for $13 a share. and that's a premium of nearly 23% to Wednesday's close of $10.58 on the Toronto Stock Exchange. The two companies have agreed to a 30-day period of exclusive negotiations. The letter of intent states Transat would be required to pay a $15 million fee, while Air Canada would be subject to a $40 million reverse break fee if either party backs out. Any deal reached between the two companies would be subject to regulatory and shareholder approvals. The Bank of Canada released its annual financial system review today. The Governor for the Bank of Canada, Stephen Poloz, talked about the impact of the mortgage stress test.
The mortgage stress tests introduced last year have improved the quality of new mortgage lending. As a result, the share of new mortgages going to highly indebted households, those that owe more than 450% of their income, has declined significantly. Also, the number of Canadians falling behind on their debt payments remains low. The combination of the revised mortgage guidelines and past increases in interest rates have helped to slow the pace of household borrowing and stabilize the overall household debt-to-income ratio in Canada.
Cattle producers across the country are backing Quebec colleagues who filed a complaint over a new meatless burger being advertised as plant-based meat. The Quebec Cattle Producers Federation says the marketing that goes with Beyond Meat's vegan products is misleading and contravenes Canadian rules. They're calling on the country's food inspection agency to intervene. Kirk Jackson, VP with the Federation, says the definition of meat is a product derived from animal carcasses. He says his group wants to protect the integrity of the products they produce. So what is the most expensive cup of coffee you've ever had? Was it $6, maybe $7 a cup? There's a California coffee chain that is serving an ultra-rare, award-winning Panamanian coffee at $75 a cup. It's said to be the most expensive coffee in the world.
Every year there's a Best of Panama competition, which is the Academy Awards of coffee. And there are about 50 lots that are auctioned off, and the Best of Panama gets to auction off 100 pounds. And there's usually a clearing price on the best coffee. And last year it cleared at $601 a pound, and this year it cleared at $803 a pound. And we were allocated 10 pounds for all of North America. We brewed 5 pounds down in LA, and that's the equivalent of about 40 to 50 cups. And we're doing 40 to 50 cups up here, total. So it's similar to wine, where 40 years ago people drank Gallo or Almaden, and now they're, talking about different winemakers and different vineyards. So, it might be connoisseurs, but, anybody can enjoy great coffee.
It does taste different.
That is the most delicious coffee I've ever had in my entire life. It's so interesting. When I first looked at it, I thought it would be hyper pretentious and I would think about all the different notes for the coffee, but I was just too busy enjoying it.
$75 for a cup of coffee. I'll stick to my double-double at Timmy's. Thank you very much. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Trudeau Liberals' controversial BC oil tanker bill, C-48, has been struck down by the Senate. A vote against the bill by independent Senator Paula Simons, along with 5 Conservative senators on the Transport Committee, swayed a final decision in favor of the Senate nixing the bill. The move does not immediately kill the oil tanker moratorium, but it'll stop the legislation in its tracks. A vote on the report is expected in the coming days. A decision to kill the bill would provide major relief for Alberta's energy sector. There's been some controversy involving a road testing device for cannabis impairment because it may not be accurate. Vancouver criminal defense lawyer Kyla Lee has details next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Lethbridge Bike Fest is a full month of exciting and informative events encouraging you to get out and ride. Taking place Friday, May 17th from 2 to 4 p.m. is the Bike Mechanic Workshop at the Crossings Branch Public Library in West Lethbridge. Have the helpful technicians from Ascent Cycle get your bike into tip-top riding shape for summer. For more information about this and other Bike Fest events, visit yqlbikefest.ca. The Great Canadian Garage Sale is taking place Saturday, May 18th from 8:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Exhibition Park's main pavilion. Admission is $8 or $6 with a non-perishable food donation to the Lethbridge Food Bank. Each admission ticket has a chance to win amazing prizes, such as a 55-inch smart TV, a drone, stereo, and home theater system. Come out for some great deals and help support a worthy cause. Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization is looking for volunteers who can assist with the Meals on Wheels program as couriers and drivers. Meals on Wheels serves 60 to 90 clients every weekday. Using their own vehicles, drivers work with the couriers to load and deliver meals on a specific route. Couriers bring the hot meals right to the client's door. Shifts take place from Monday to Friday, 10:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. For more information, call Chelsea at 403-320-2222. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Now that cannabis is legal in Canada, one of the challenges for police has been finding a roadside testing device for cannabis impairment levels that is accurate. Kyla Lee is a criminal defense lawyer practicing at Acumen Law Corporation in Vancouver and joins me now via Skype. Welcome to Bridge City News, Kyla.
Thank you for having me.
Now, it's bad news if the roadside impairment testing device turns out inaccurate results. What kind of devices are police departments starting to use right now?
So right now there are one device that's approved in Canada and one that is in the final stages of public consultation before approval. So the first one is the Draeger Drug Test 5000. That's a roadside saliva testing device. And the second one is called the Abbott Sotoxa. It's renamed from the Alair DDS2, which was field tested prior to the roadside saliva testing legislation taking place in Canada.
Now, I understand that you actually own one of these and you've been trained to use it, but you tested this piece of equipment and it actually gave a false positive to people who ate poppy seed loaf?
Yes, we own the Draeger Drug Test 5000, and we did a number of tests a couple weeks ago involving different substances that might produce false positives. We had a positive test for opiates on the basis of somebody eating poppy seed loaf. Even half an hour after they ate the cake, they were still producing a positive reading for opiates. Now, that's not as much of a concern in Canada because the Draeger Drug Test 5000 here is being programmed not to detect for opiates. So most people are not going to find themselves in a difficult situation as a result of that. But we also got false positive results on the device for THC for an individual who had only been using CBD, and a false positive for cocaine for somebody who had consumed coca leaf tea.
As you mentioned earlier with the Draeger, is that it's unable to differentiate between THC and CBD. Could this potentially land an innocent driver in jail?
This could have huge consequences for innocent people. CBD is non-impairing. It doesn't have any psychoactive properties or effects on people. And a lot of people take it for pain management, to deal with anxiety, to deal with medical issues. It's been used in medical applications in Canada for a long time. And so people who have legitimate medical conditions that may cause them to present as though they're impaired because they have a back injury and they're walking funny, or they have a toothache and they're slurring their speech, something like that, that could then be used in conjunction with the saliva test result to give the officer basis to arrest them, take them to jail, subject them to further testing, and potentially found a criminal charge.
Now, Kyla, what about the criticism of the Draeger for apparently not working well in colder temperatures? As you know, you and I live in Canada and can get a little chilly here at times.
It is a big concern, because we have a climate in this country that is varied, and because large portions of the country, I'm lucky to live in Vancouver, but most of the country for half the year is outside the operating temperature of the Draeger Drug Test 5000, which is 4 to 40 degrees Celsius. So we're going to see cases where there are false positives. They did a study in Sweden involving the use of the device in colder temperatures, and they found 15% false positive rates when it was used in those conditions. which from the perspective of a defense lawyer and of a driver, it's something that I don't want to take a 15% risk going down the road that I'm potentially going to be arrested on the basis of the weather.
Now, Draeger representatives have responded to these criticisms and say the device you have tested is not the same device used by Canadian law enforcement agencies. Is it different from the one that you have?
The only difference in the device that we have and the one that's used by Canadian law enforcement is in the programming for what types of substances are being detected. That doesn't change the analytical method that underlies what's being done with the device. In fact, it's the same analysis. So what we're testing is the science. We're not testing the programming. And the science isn't going to change in Canada. The science stays the same.
Now, Draeger officials also say that the device used by Canadian law enforcement agencies can only detect cocaine and THC, and that it's not able to detect opioids. So eating poppy seed loaf would not actually result in an arrest. Your thoughts?
It wouldn't result in an arrest, but there's an interesting provision in our criminal code that allows a police officer at the end of a drug recognition evaluation, which is a 12-stage process to determine impairment, to take a bodily sample from a driver to test for one of 7 categories or classes of drugs. And if the Draeger Drug Test 5000 is used in that context, and the government uses it and gets it programmed to test for opiates, then we could see false positives from people in those situations. Those results would be admissible in court as proof of impairment at trial.
Are police officers able to simply use a field sobriety test on drivers? So would this have a proper level of accuracy in determining whether an individual is impaired by cannabis?
So police can use either the Draeger Drug Test 5000 or a standardized field sobriety test to test for impairment roadside. On the basis of the results of either of those, they can arrest the driver and then put them through the drug recognition evaluation. The results of the saliva test on their own aren't admissible in court as proof of impairment without that failed drug recognition evaluation and subsequent testing.
Now, one of the problems with field tests, however, is the length of time it actually takes. Will this take a little more manpower?
The field tests don't take that much more manpower because they only require one officer to administer them. Obviously, there are concerns with any process about how long it takes, but the Draeger Drug Test 5000 doesn't cut down the process as far as time. Its sample collection period is a minimum of 1 minute and a maximum of 4 minutes of swabbing the device inside your mouth. The swab is then placed into the instrument, which does the analysis, which can take up to 10 minutes to complete. So we're talking maybe 15 minutes for the whole process. That doesn't really shorten things from conducting a physical test roadside.
Okay, let's talk a bit about the police officer's testimony in court. Is it more difficult for the prosecution to win with a field test, or is it tougher with a clear number from a testing device?
That's a really difficult question to answer because we haven't seen these roadside testing devices challenged in court as of yet. We haven't had cases go to trial where officers are going to be cross-examined on them. But in my experience, the physical coordination tests, because it relies on the subjective opinion of the officer at the end of the day, there's more fertile ground for cross-examination and more ways you can try and undermine the officer not administering it correctly. Judges tend to place a lot of reliance on science, so it might make the evidence stronger in court. But at the end of the day, at this stage, all a judge is assessing is whether or not the officer had grounds for a further arrest, not whether somebody was impaired.
Let's change gears for just a moment here. A 76-year-old Victoria woman has launched a constitutional challenge against the law that allows police to demand a breathalyzer without any signs that the driver's impaired. Can you briefly share what happened to this lady in a liquor store parking lot?
So this woman, who was completely sober, was stopped by police randomly in a liquor store parking lot to check her sobriety. She was asked to provide a breath sample, and she attempted numerous times, but was unable to do so. She had a hearing before British Columbia's Superintendent of Motor Vehicles, similar to the Alberta Transportation Safety Board. And at the hearing, she provided evidence from her doctor confirming that she suffers from a medical condition, COPD, that affected her ability to breathe. The adjudicator at her hearing rejected that evidence and found that she had intentionally refused to comply with the officer's demand. She had her license suspended for 90 days, her car impounded for 30. She was referred to a remedial alcohol counseling program, which she had to pay for and complete before she was permitted to drive again.
Wow, so license suspension, vehicle impounded because she had a medical condition?
Yes, essentially, she wasn't able, in British Columbia, the burden of proof is on the driver to establish that they're innocent. And her evidence wasn't sufficient in the adjudicator's mind to prove her innocence. And even though the officer had no basis to think that she'd been drinking, because the law now authorizes random breath testing and random traffic stops for the purpose of random breath testing, she had a legal obligation to comply with his demand, even though she'd done nothing wrong.
So, Kyla, in your opinion, what needs to change with the law as you see it?
Well, I think the random breath testing provisions of the criminal code need to go. They are unconstitutional. The Supreme Court of Canada has repeatedly ruled since the early 80s that roadside breath testing violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it's only saved by the fact that people are asked to do this on the basis of an officer believing there's alcohol in their body. Now that Parliament has eliminated that, they've really put this legislation in a precarious position vis-a-vis its constitutionality. And I think it needs to go. I expect that the courts, particularly with facts like that woman's, are going to not be very sympathetic to the way that this law is being applied. It really seems heavy-handed in cases like that, where you have elderly people with documented medical conditions who are punished for doing nothing wrong.
So do you think the law will be overturned at some point in time? And if so, how long will that actually take to happen?
I believe the law will be overturned. Ultimately, this process is going to take several years. It's going to be a hearing in British Columbia Superior Court. There's also a hearing, I know, coming up for one I'm working on in Yukon. There are challenges filed in Ontario as well. We're going to run the possibility with multiple challenges in multiple jurisdictions of inconsistent judgments between our courts. That has to work its way to the appellate levels of all of those courts. And then ultimately, this will be something that will have to be considered by the Supreme Court of Canada. It's probably going to be 3 to 5 years before all is said and done.
So let me ask you something. The police officers you've spoken to, Kyla, do they think it's more of a hassle, or do they think they're actually saving lives?
The majority of police officers that I talk to about this aren't huge fans of the new law. They find that it does, it gives the police too much power. It's not that difficult for police officers to form a suspicion that somebody's been drinking. All you have to do is smell the liquor or have somebody admit drinking, which in my experience, most people tend to do. And so the police don't feel like this is something they needed. This is something that was the brainchild of our government and not something that police forces were saying is necessary to save lives.
I have to tell you about this time when I was playing a late night basketball game. 12 midnight, I wrapped up. I'm going through a check stop. The police officer with his 3-foot-long flashlight shines it in the window. Says, "Sir, have you had anything to drink tonight?" I said, "No, not at all. I was just playing basketball with the boys." He says, "That's great. Go home, have a few beer and carb up." He's telling me to have beer at a check stop. Well, no, go home and have it, but obviously.
Yeah.
So it's good to see that our authorities have a good sense of humor as well. Kyla Lee is a criminal defense lawyer practicing at Acumen Law Corporation in Vancouver. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
A recent report commissioned by Environment and Climate Change Canada got a lot of media coverage. The headlines read, "Canada warmed twice as fast as the entire planet since 1948. Well, we're joined by Dr. Ross McKittrick, professor of economics at the University of Guelph. He recently wrote an article published in the Financial Post entitled, "Hold the Panic, Canada just warmed 1.7 degrees and thrived." That is an alarming headline, Professor McKittrick, but you believe saying Canada warmed twice as fast as the whole planet doesn't actually prove anything?
Well, no, it doesn't. First of all, because we've long known that whenever you have a warming phase going on, regardless of the cause, the land warms faster than the oceans. 70% of the Earth's surface is ocean. So whatever land mass you pick is going to warm faster than the global average. And so if they'd looked at Russia or areas of the southern hemisphere even, they would have found the land areas warm faster than the global average because the average is pulled down by the oceans. Also, Canada is a northern country. Part of the Arctic is in our land mass. And another feature of the way the climate system works is the polar regions are supposed to warm faster than the lower latitudes. So that, again, pulls up the average for Canada. What it doesn't mean, though, is if anyone thinks that this means because we're a heavy emitter or that means we're more polluted, that's a complete misreading. And I think in that sense, for Environment Canada to keep headlining a statement like that, it almost invites a misinterpretation.
Right, yeah, because that's the implication. I think people just kind of bite on that just automatically, right? Now, if it were, and if it is true, if faster warming is happening in Canada, is that necessarily a bad thing for us here? I mean, again, with the winter we had here, we're kind of going, it sounds good, right?
Well, one of the points that I made in the article was that within Canada, there are some regions that warmed twice as fast as other regions, or even 3 times as fast. And wherever you live, chances are one season might have warmed twice as fast as another. And we hardly notice these things. In fact, if you're not sure whether spring or fall warmed faster for you wherever you live, if you wouldn't know unless you looked in the report. That just tells you how little it mattered to you over the years. Another perspective is to talk to an 80-year-old, because they were entering their teens at the time these temperature records began, 1948. So from the 50s to the present, ask them what they experienced in their life. What were the changes that they lived through? And I'm sure they'll have a long list of things that they can talk about, of all the things that have changed. I really doubt they're going to highlight minor changes in the weather. But if they did, chances are they would say, it feels like winter's a bit shorter and less brutally cold than it used to be, and that's a good thing. I'm glad about that.
Right, so it's not necessarily a big negative. Okay. By the way, this climate change report was released on the very same day the government's new carbon tax regime came into effect in 4 provinces. So now that's probably just coincidence, right, Professor McKittrick?
Well, a lot of people pointed to that coincidence, that the report was leaked on the same day as the carbon tax came into play. It came into place. Now, you can tell from the report they've been working on it a long time, so maybe they had always scheduled it for that particular day, but yeah, a lot of people found that suspicious.
Somewhat convenient, it would seem. Now, you write in your report a little bit about confirmation bias. What is that exactly, and how does it work?
Well, confirmation bias arises when you have a certain idea in your head and you start just seeing evidence that confirms it. You are sort of tuned out of any evidence that may conflict with it, and you only really pay attention to things that confirm it. Now, we've been hearing from the government over and over for many, many years, for decades now, that climate change is happening and it's a hazardous, dangerous, terrible thing. And so what you see as far as confirmation bias goes is now anytime there's a bad storm, for instance, or if there's a hot day in the summer, then people say, oh, well, that's evidence of climate change, as if we didn't used to get thunderstorms and hot days in the summer, and as if there didn't used to be forest fires or things like that. So confirmation bias in a case like this arises. You hear it when politicians talk about the importance of climate policy because we have so many forest fires or we have extreme weather events. The obvious rejoinder there is we've always had forest fires and we've always had extreme weather events. To settle that, what you have to do is go and look at the data. Are we getting more forest fires than we used to? Are we getting more extreme weather events than we used to? And that's where the federal government's own data makes it clear that no, actually we're not. The National Forest Service has data going back decades on forest fire rates in Canada, and at least since the 1990s, they've been trending down, not up. And as far as extreme weather goes, the new report from Environment Canada doesn't assert that we're seeing more extreme rainfall events or extreme precipitation events. And other data sets that Environment Canada has put out recently confirm that most cities across the country haven't seen any change, and to the extent there's a pattern, we actually have fewer heavy downpour events now than we did 20, 30 years ago.
That is fascinating. I think there is something to that confirmation bias as well. It reminds me of, when you buy a new car, and then suddenly you notice the same brand of car all over the place because it's new to you and you're looking for it. So again, it's a psychological effect, I think, right? Suddenly we notice it. And those cars have been there the whole time, right? So now, when we have a really dry season, wet, cold, hot season, whatever it might be, is that the exception, again, or is it a trend? We talk about natural weather cycles that repeat themselves over the centuries. You mentioned the 80-year-old, so forth, going back to, over time. You point out last summer when the media hyped a report from the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change. warning that 1.5 degrees of warming was a disaster threshold. And yet, the title of your article there, Canada has warmed 1.7 degrees since 1948, but, no panic, So did we miss something here?
Well, isn't that an interesting question? Last summer, we were told over and over, if you cross 1.5 degrees of warming compared to pre-industrial times, that will be a catastrophe. We have to avoid it at all costs. Now we're told, oh, we actually warmed 1.7 degrees just since 1948. Was it a catastrophe? Well, no, actually the country got a lot better off over that time. Our incomes have gone up, population's gone up, lifespan has gone up, health has improved. On every measure we have, things pretty much got better. So if that's a catastrophe, I only wish every catastrophe looked like that.
That's a good way to put it. Now, I think what seems to convince the public that this is alarm-worthy is that so many of the reports make claims that virtually all of the world's climate change scientists agree that the planet is warming up dangerously fast. So what do we do with that?
Well, what you do with that is you look at what the scientists, who was surveyed, first of all, and what they were actually asked. Now, the way you summarized it is the classic summary that 97% of the world's scientists believe climate's changing, it's a hazard, dangerous thing, and it's our fault. The surveys don't actually ask that. What's usually asked is, do you think the climate is warming? Do humans have a role to play, or do humans play a role in that? And you get very high agreement. In fact, I personally don't know anyone who works in this field who would disagree with those statements, but they're very general. If you then get to asking, do you think most of the warming is caused by greenhouse gases? Then the agreement begins to shrink. And if you say, and do you think this is a crisis or a problem that we should devote a lot of resources to trying to stop? Then the agreement is even lower, and you just get into the realm of active debate and people on both sides of those questions. So it's a research area, which means people hold different points of view and the data aren't clear, and that's why people argue about it. So what you do with the point you raised is there is very high agreement, obviously, on things like carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, and that compared to the 1800s, the world is warmer today on many measures, a little bit warmer. But are humans the dominant cause? And looking to the future, is this going to be a big problem that we should try to avoid? It's much harder to find agreement on those issues.
Mm-hmm. In fact, U.S. climate scientist Judith Curry had this to say last year: extreme values of possible sea level rise are regarded as so unlikely that we cannot even assign a probability. So, if you don't follow the crowd, I think what happens is you start to get called names, you don't get invited to certain high-profile events to speak, you may lose funding. So, my question is, how is this in any way a scientific approach? Normally scientists are quite, and maybe the scientists are, and maybe it's the media hype, I don't know, but I seem to recall that Galileo kind of unfollowed the crowd as well, right?
Yeah, it is a field, especially for younger scientists, it is very hard for them to dissent from what appears to be a party line in the field. And now, if you look at what they're publishing, if you look at the studies that are in the journals, it's, like I say, the points of view all over the place. And even within reports like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there's a wide range of points of view in there, and a lot of different conclusions can be supported based on the evidence that's in those reports. But as far as who has the dominant voice in the field and who are the people on the news every night and who tend to be the senior people on the government panels, that is a much smaller group of people, and they hold a lot of influence in their profession. And it makes me glad, actually, that I'm in the field of economics, not in the field of climatology, because I think it would be very difficult as a if I was a young academic starting out, I think it would be very difficult to be in that field just because of the intense pressure to follow the party line.
It would take an immense amount of courage, no doubt about it. Another frequent claim that is that all climate scientists believe climate change is caused by humans. And again, it's not that they don't agree to that, but to what extent, right? So let's pretend that, this giant, bright, hot, shiny object we call the sun might have a part to play too. There's certainly other factors that I think we need to take a very close look at, right?
Yeah. Now, that takes it out of the areas that I've looked at closely, although I can say, just looking at it from a statistical perspective, that it's extremely difficult to identify long, slow changes in any data set. The tools that we have for the length of data that's available for climate observations mean we can look at changes that happen on short time scales and try to correlate them with things that might have driven those changes on short time scales. But it is known that there are long, slow cyclical patterns and natural sources of variability in the climate system long before there were any cars on the road or before people were using fossil fuels. We know that the climate went in and out of warm and cool periods, and it's there in the paleo record and the geological record. And obviously, those are natural changes. They weren't driven by greenhouse gases. So trying to explain what caused all those, and we can't assume that all those factors suddenly stopped having any effect as of 1850. They're still active and they still affect the climate system. So this issue of natural variability, what are the mechanisms, what are the big drivers, that's an extremely important topic. I don't think it gets nearly enough attention. There's just been so much work trying to attribute changes to greenhouse gas emissions. It's a lot harder to find active research out there on, well, you mentioned the sun and other sources of natural climate variability.
Yeah, that does make sense when you really think it through step by step. Now, after several decades now of alarmist claims, the sky is falling, the sea is rising, glaciers are melting, and so forth, at what point does society say, I cry wolf, enough is enough?
It is an interesting feature of public opinion surveys that despite the enormous amount of PR, the effort of environmentalists, but also of government ministries and government agencies, the public opinion needle hasn't really moved a whole lot. There's a concern out there. There's a general sense of concern, as there would be for any environmental issue, that climate change, we hear it's a threat, and so the public want to make sure that someone competent is looking at that and dealing with it. But as far as a public priority, polls keep showing that it's at the bottom of the list, and election outcomes keep showing that parties that try to push, in the name of climate change, if they push very expensive policies that cost jobs or drive up energy prices, no matter what people tell pollsters, when it's their livelihoods and their job and their ability to afford the energy they need, when all that's at stake, their real priorities emerge, and their priorities are that they want affordable energy and reliable employment.
And we've just seen that, of course, in our Alberta election as well. Professor McKittrick, one of my concerns is that we are perhaps teaching our younger generation that it's not okay to disagree with something that's politically correct, societal belief. Somehow this is considered extreme or hateful. We're told what to think and believe, but not how to think for ourselves. That's scary to me. Any thoughts on that? I mean, we see this in our education system, I think, in post-secondary.
Well, I can remember in school learning the fable of the emperor with no clothes, and it's told in a way that the message to young people is you should be like that. You should be the brave one in the crowd who's willing to just ignore the consensus of what everybody else is saying and just tell it like it is and tell us what you see and what you think. And and I'm sure that's still taught, and I'm sure in principle teachers want their students to do that. But then, as you've alluded to, when that actually happens, then suddenly we discover that society isn't nearly as hospitable to people speaking out against popular consensus positions. And maybe it's always been that way. I'm not a student of history, but I'm sure that there are just lots of episodes throughout history where there does actually emerge a very strong social consensus, and suddenly real debate becomes almost impossible, and very few people are willing to speak up on it. And I think the lesson out of those episodes is then you better pay attention to those people that do speak up, even if there aren't very many of them. Listen carefully, because if it's costly for people to speak up against a consensus, and they're doing it out of a sense of conviction, then chances are they have something important to say, and you better pay attention to it.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Professor McKittrick, and I appreciate your courage in taking the risk to speak out on this.
Well, thank you. My pleasure.
All right. Dr. Ross McKittrick, Professor of Economics at the University of Guelph, thank you so much for watching today.